So far in our Gatling scripts, we have only been using data and values that are hard-coded or extracted from a previous call. When you come to running Gatling performance test scripts for many users, you will typically want different users to input different data. For example, you would want the login names of users to be different, or with the video game DB, for them to call the details of different games. There are a few ways to achieve this in Gatling. One is through the use of CSV feeders, which we will look at in this video. CSV stands for comma separated value file. It is a simple file that is used to hold data, typically used for parameterization. We want to make a Gatling script that will make the same call to getSpecificGame 10 times. But for each of the calls, we want the game ID to be different. We also want to check that the game name we get back is what we expect. First, let's add a CSV file to our project. In the Gatling Resources Data folder, right-click and choose New File. Give it a name of Game CSV File.csv. The first line of the CSV file always contains the column headings, so type Game ID, Game Name. The rest of the lines are going to contain the actual data, so let's input that now. We will input the first 4 game IDs and their respective names. That will do for now. Next, to create a new Gatling script to use this file. Right-click on Simulations and select New Scala class. Give it a name of csvfeeder.scala. As usual, extend the class from base simulation and add in the 2 imports. The first thing that we need to do is to declare the CSV feeder. Let's jump over to the Gatling cheat sheet to peek how we might do it. We can see here we can use CSV file name to create a CSV feeder. We can also see that there are 4 feeder strategies. Q is the default. It will go through the lines in the CSV file one by one. If it runs out of lines, the script will throw an error. This strategy isn't what we want here. Shuffle is the same as Q, except the values are chosen in a random order, but the script will still throw an error when it runs out. Random will choose values randomly, but this time values can be chosen several times, and Gatling won't throw an error if the file runs out of entries. Finally, circular will choose each entry in the CSV file in order, and when it runs out of values, we'll go back to the top and start again. This is the strategy we will use in this example. Back in the Gatling script, type val CSV feeder equals CSV game CSV file.csv .circular. So we have declared our CSV feeder and pointed it to the file in Gatling Resources Data. As a reminder, it's important to put the CSV file in this folder location so that it gets picked up by the Gatling plugin we are using. Now we can start typing our scenario definition. As a reminder, we want to call the same endpoint, getSpecificGame 10 times using our CSV feeder. Type def getSpecificVideoGame equals, repeat 10, feed CSV feeder dot exec http getSpecificVideoGame dot get video games / game ID dot check JSON path $.name .is $game name .pause 1. Let's talk through what we just wrote line by line. First, we add a repeat block and said to repeat 10 times. Inside the block, we called the CSV feeder that we declared previously. We then named our transaction as normal, getSpecificVideoGame. We then entered the endpoint to call, but we used a parameter of game ID. This parameter will change with each call and will be populated by the CSV file, i.e. 1 on the first call, 2 on the second, etc. We then added a check on the game name in the JSON. Again, we are using a parameter for the game name from the CSV file that will update on each call. Finally, we added a pause of 1 second between each call. Let's finish the script with the scenario definition and the load scenario. Type file scn equals scenario video game db dot exec get specific video game. We can copy the load scenario from a previous script, as we are still just using a single user. Now we are ready to run our test. Update the Gatling runner class, changing the sim class to CSV feeder. Make sure the video game DB is running, and run the test. The test runs and makes 10 calls. We can see from the data captured in the proxy that the endpoint is changing each time and the name of the game is different, as corresponds in the CSV file. As mentioned at the start of the video, this technique of using a CSV file is very handy if you know the exact test data that you expect your users to input, such as usernames and passwords. As shown in the Gatling cheat sheet, there are other types of feeder that we can use in our test that use different types of files. Feel free to play around with these. In the next video, we will look at the most powerful feeder in Gatling, the custom feeder. One of the most powerful features of Gatling is the ability to write custom feeders. A custom feeder doesn't require an external file like a CSV file, and it will give you the ability to generate an infinite stream of values. Now, if you haven't done much programming in Scala beforehand, the following code might look a little confusing at first, but with patience and a bit of practice, you will soon get the hang of it. Let's start with a simple example and create a feeder that just changes the game ID each time it is called. To save some time, copy the CSV feeder.scala class and paste it in the same directory. Give the new class a name of CSV feeder to custom.scala. Delete the CSV feeder at the top and remove the check call that used the game name. Now we are good to go. First of all, we need a variable that will hold the ID numbers. Type var ID numbers equals 1 to 10 dot iterator. This variable will hold the ID numbers 1 to 10 for us. Now we can write our feeder. Type val custom feeder equals iterator dot continually map game ID right arrow ID numbers dot next. Let's talk through what we just wrote. We start by declaring a value called custom feeder. We then set to iterate over this continually. Continually means every time you ask this feeder for a new entry, it will execute the code within the brackets. In the brackets, we return a map. The map has just one key value pair. The key is game ID and the value is the next ID number from our variable above. Let's run the test. First, change the name of the feeder here to custom feeder. Now open the Gatling runner class and change the sim class to CSV feeder to custom. Go ahead and run the test. The test makes 10 calls. We can see in the traffic captured in the proxy that the game ID being called each time is different, so our feeder is working as expected. If you are still struggling to see how the feeder works, you could rewrite it to make it a bit simpler. We will take the logic inside the continually block and put it into its own method. Type def get next game ID equals map game ID right arrow ID numbers dot next. And now change the custom feeder to call this method instead. This might make it a bit clearer for you. Feel free to run the test again. This was a very simple example of a feeder. In the next video, we will build a more complex one that we will use to post new games to the video game DB. In the last video, we wrote a relatively simple custom feeder that would just give us a new game ID for our HTTP calls. In this video, we're going to expand upon what we learned and create a custom feeder that we can post to the Create Game API to create a new game in the DB for us. Let's start by having a look at the API call and see exactly what it is we need to send. With the video game DB running, open up Swagger. Have a look at the post call for video games. This is an example of the JSON that we need to send the API to create a new game. We need an ID, a name, a release date, a review score, a category, and a rating. Let's go back to our Gatling project and see how we might write this custom feeder. We will create a new script for this feeder, so right-click on Simulations and choose New Scala class. Give it the name of Custom Feeder. As usual, extend the class off of base simulation and add the imports. Let's start by setting up the template for our custom feeder. With the template written, we can fill in the required fields with the necessary code. Type val custom feeder equals iterator.continually map. Let's now add in the names of all the keys in our map. Leave the values blank for now. Game ID, name, release date, review score, category, rating. Now we can fill in these values, starting with game ID. We know how to create a collection that holds game IDs from our work in the previous video. So go ahead and type var ID numbers equals 11 to 20.iterator. Note that we are using numbers 11 to 20 as we want to create new games, and games 1 to 10 already exist in the DB. Next to game ID, type ID numbers.next. Next, we need to give our games a name. There are several ways we could do this, but I am just going to give all the games a name of game hyphen and then 5 random characters. To do this, we first need to declare a random value. Type val rnd equals new random. And now let's create a helper method that will create a random string for us. Type def random string length int equals rnd.alphanumeric.filter underscore .isLetter .take length .mkstring. So this method takes an integer for the length and returns a random string of that many characters. Let's add the call to this function in our feeder. Type game hyphen plus random string 5. So now every time we call this feeder, we will get a game name of game hyphen and 5 random characters in a string. The next value we need is a release date. Again, we will write a method to give us a random date. First, we need to declare a value for the pattern of this date. Val pattern equals datetime formatter dot of pattern yyyy hyphen mm hyphen dd. We also need a value to hold today's date. Val now equals local date dot now. Now we can write the method itself. Def get random date start date local date comma random random string equals start date dot minus days random dot next int 30 dot format pattern. This is a method called getRandomDate. It takes 2 inputs, the start date and the random number. The method will deduct the random number of days between 1 and 30 from the start date that is provided, returning it in the pattern that we specified. Let's put the call to the method in our custom feeder. Next to release date, put getRandomDate now rnd. Next, we need to add a review score. This will be a bit easier. We can just use the random value that we've already declared and ask for a random int between 1 and 100. Next to review score, type rnd.nextInt 100. Next is the category. We can do this in a similar way to how we created the random game name, and can make use of the random string method again. Next to category, type category hyphen plus random string 6. So all games will have a category of category hyphen and 6 random characters. Do the same thing for the rating. Type rating hyphen plus random string 4. Now all games have a rating of rating hyphen and 4 random characters. That's all the code we need for our custom feeder. In the next video, we will look at how to call it in our Gatling script. In this video, we will look at how to call the custom feeder we created in the previous video that will provide all the data we need to create a new game. For completeness, I'm going to show two ways this can be done, by writing out the raw JSON code and through a template file. I recommend doing this through a template file as it's a lot cleaner, but I will show you how to do it through raw text as well. Let's write the Gatling method that will create the new game for us. Type def post new game equals repeat 5 because we want to make 5 different calls. Feed custom feeder dot exec http post new game post video games. Notice we are using a HTTP post here in Gatling for the first time. Normally we have just done get. Dot body string body dot as JSON. To save time here, I'm just going to copy and paste the example JSON in. Feel free to skip this part as I don't recommend you do it like this for your post call, but if you want to type it in, feel free to pause the video or you can copy it from the exercise files. Finish the method by adding a check to .check status.is200 and a pause of 1 second between each call. Let's look at the JSON in more detail. We can see that we are using parameters for all of the values. Those values are coming from the custom feeder here. To finish the script, let's add in the scenario definition and the load scenario for a single virtual user. Let's run the script and see what happens. Open the Gatling runner and change the sim class to custom feeder. Run the test. Looking in the proxy logs, we can see that 5 calls were made to create a new game, each with different data. Let's make sure the new games are in the database. Open up Swagger and call the top API to get all games. If we look towards the bottom of the response body, we can see the 5 new games have been added. In the previous video, we had to type out some quite ugly formatted JSON to call our custom feeder. In this video, I will show you a cleaner way to do this through using a template file. The template file will match the request body that we send to the create new game call, but each of the values will be parameterized. Inside Gatling, Resources, Bodies, right-click and choose Create New File. Give it a name of newGameTemplate.json. Open up Swagger. Expand the post request and copy the example JSON for this request. Paste the JSON into the file. Now go through each of the values in the file and replace them with the corresponding value as in the custom feeder. Game ID, name, release date, review score, category, rating. Now go back to the custom feeder Gatling script. Inside the dot body, delete all the text in there. Instead, type .body el file body new game template.json .as JSON. Now when this post call is made in Gatling, the script will look up the new game template JSON file and replace all the parameters in the file with the values from the feeder. As a reminder, it's important to put the file in the Gatling Resources Bodies location so that it gets picked up by Gatling. Before we start the script, it's important to clear the database of any games we have already created, else the script will throw an error that the game already exists. Either delete the games individually through the API, or simply open the terminal where the application is running, press Ctrl and C to stop it, and press Y. Now start the application again with Gradle W boot run. Once the application is booted, run the Gatling script as normal. The script runs with the same behaviour as before, creating 5 different games in the DB for us. Using the template file is common practice in this behaviour and makes our Gatling script much easier to read and maintain.